Hey folks, welcome to Sketch and Stitch. My name is Billy, and on this channel we cover costumes from concept to construction. Today we're going to talk about a great alternative to Copic and Prismacolor markers. Let's hop on in. I am so excited to share with you these new markers that I bought that I think are going to be great for young designers. I bought them on Amazon, and I think they were $35. They're called Touch New. They're 80 pieces. They also have 100, I think, or 120, but they're wonderful. They're not as good. They don't blend as well as Prismacolor markers, but I want to show you what all you get. So for $35, you're going to get 80 different markers and pens. So many markers, and they're pretty good. Each one of them, I'll show you. Each one has has a fine tip end, which you can kind of see, or a broad tip end. So they're Copic knockoffs. They're really cheap. They work pretty well. They blend well. I'm going to show you all the colors you get because you kind of see the color tips don't necessarily match. So I made my own swatch chart, which I highly recommend, and in the next video we're going to talk about making your own. But this is all the numbers, and you can see you get quite a few colors. You get a pretty wide range. There's not a lot of orange or just a few oranges, and there's just a few purples, but you get quite a bit. And this doesn't include all the grays. There are more grays than what I've shown here. So the only downside is, as you can see, you get a lot of grays, a ton of grays. But if you're a person who really likes to shadow and you really like to work on contour, these grays can be really helpful. So what I'm going to do today is show you, we're going to do a rendering together for a show I'm working on now, Midsummer Night's Dream by Shakespeare. We're going to work on this Titania dress, and we're going to see how it turns out. So we're going to start in with a skin tone first. You can see I have my light source arrow up in the upper right hand corner. I'm going to just fill in, moving in the direction of the body, and I'm going to continue adding in layers, working from my light source shadow side first. So I fill that in. Continue darkening in the layers. These markers work really well actually. They don't have as many buildable layers as a Prismacolor marker, but they work really nice and they blend together pretty well as well. So you can see I continually am darkening in the skin, adding lots and lots of layers on top. And that's the real key to get dimension, is to add lots of multiple layers. I'm going to start filling in the dress, working in the direction of the actual fabric. You can see I'm going down the skirt in long strokes. I'm going to work my way around, just filling in, as blending together and as quickly as I can, so that I have as few brush strokes as I possibly can. And if I do have brush strokes, they're going to work for me because they're moving in the direction that the fabric is supposed to be on the dress. So I'll continue filling that in, working my way around the bottom of this dress. I'm using the broad tip end, which I think works really well for this. You have the small nib end for working, or like the bullet point nib for working in tiny areas. I am working around the flowers that I've designed on this dress because you can't subtract color when you're working with markers. You can only add. So you want to make sure you work around those since they are supposed to be a creamy yellow color. So I'm sort of coloring in around that. And then I'm going to continue filling in. Next, I'm going to move up to the top bodice portion of the dress. I'm sort of working around from the waistband, and then I'm going to work straight up into the actual top of the dress. And you see I'm always moving in the direction that the fabric is laying on the garment, and that's really key. I'm going in now and adding a second layer, and I've filled in. You can see now I have several layers in, and you can see I'm darkening in the shadow areas. That way you really get dimension and you add depth to the actual garment. I'm pulling away because the waist is gathered, so I'm adding in those gather lines. Darkening in the outer edges. I was actually pretty impressed with these markers because I think for their price point, they work great. And I think if you're a person who is on a tight budget, they work really, really well. They are alcohol based. They're cheap. They're really comfortable to hold, so you don't have to worry that they're not very bulky, they're not big, they're not too small. They feel really nice when you're holding them in your hand. I mean, they are Copic knockoffs, I believe, and they feel very similar to Copic markers. You can see I'm adding in those pleats and tucks that are on the front of my dress design, darkening in those layers. And now I'm going to be adding more and more texture into the skirt portion. You can see I'm skipping around where my flowers are. And the way that I sort of get those lines is I rotate my paper. That way it's easy for me to work with my hand in that direction. And now I'm darkening in even more, adding more shadow, more depth. It's starting to look really nice. Whenever I teach this, I always tell students, you're just adding little squiggles, little lines, little squiggles, but that's really what you're doing to create some of those, the depth, and just to give suggestion that this is a really gathered skirt. I'm picking up darker greens. I'm going to add in even more shadow, really pull in the dark shadows of this dress, and you can see I'm adding that in a few spots just to add more dimension. I'm always really paying attention to where my light source is coming from. And you can see on the left side of the dress it's so much darker because that's the shadow side. So anytime a pleat goes and wraps around, it's going to be darker in those crevices. Now I'm working on the waistband, on this sort of belt of the skirt, and I know I wanted it to be into a yellow range, so I just layered a yellow over top of it. And I'm starting to color in my flowers with a cream. And I'm just doing a single layer. I'll then use the same marker to add more layers as we go and continue to add more dimension. Filling in these armbands now. I wanted them to be a gold color, so I'm using a couple shades of gold. I'm using a lighter color and then a bright yellow, and then also a burnt ochre, which is like a yellowy color, a nice burnt yellow. That's what I'm using now. So I'm going to continue to add more. And one of the tricks that I use to blend multiple colors together is I'll go back once I use a darker shade and use the previous shade to blend over it to soften the shadow line so that it blends them together more. That's the same way that you blend Copics. So you just sort of work in this back and forth method to add color. You can see now I'm going into hair. I'd already added to the center of the flowers. And so I'm moving in the direction that hair grows, and that's really the key. And I continually add more and more layers of color, thinking about the way hair is. And hair is a multi-tonal thing, so it needs multiple shades. You can't just paint it in as one color. I'm going in and adding this vine detail that we ended up finding a trim that I really liked, and I incorporated in the dress. So I'm drawing in those vines that were sewn at the waist, and we're adding in the little tiny details. And I urge you, like, if you think of great little details, draw them in. Sometimes you can find some great trim. Now I'm going in and I'm going to actually outline the outer edges to define the edges of my sketch. Some designers don't do this. They'll use the marker to define the outer edge. I like how quick this is. It gives a nice, strong, bold outline. Some people don't like it, so if it's not your cup of tea, then don't do it. I enjoy it, and it's sort of become part of my style at this point. So now I'm going to work my way around. The only thing to be careful is that this ink pen can easily smear if it's not dry. So you have to sort of work your way around carefully so you don't smear it. going over my flowers, and the pen that I'm using actually came with the markers. It's not a bad pen. It's like a 0.1 micro marker. It's like a little ink pen. It's great. I was actually really impressed with it. It's as good as some of the more expensive lining pens that I have. So as you're working with your face, you just have to be very careful because you can easily mess up at this point. You've put so much work into your sketch and your rendering. And the last thing you want to do is to, have a really sort of ugly face on this beautiful dress and jewelry and all the things you've done. So just take your time and make your way around. So I'm going to fill in the face and then add some more jewelry and hair. And you're going to draw all of that in. You're going to draw your hair in, especially in the direction that it grows. So you're going to see I'm barely putting in face pieces here. I'm really careful. I don't typically add a lot of detail when it comes to the face. I make sure that I just give a suggestion because it's more important that I'm showing the costume rather than the figure's face. And I'm almost done. I'm just going to add in some highlights in a second and it'll be all finished. I'm using a gel pen for that.
Are you almost done?
As soon as I get there. Yeah, just adding in more jewelry at this point. To darken the shadows a little more, I'm going to use a cool gray, and I'm going back in and adding a little bit of cast shadows around my flowers and my details and my jewelry. And then I'm also darkening in the shadows around the edges of my skirt. I'm also going to put in a ground line so that my rendering is not floating in just a minute. Once I have my ground in place, I'm just going to do some final highlights with a gel pen, and then it's all done. If you like the video, be sure that you like and subscribe and share the video with all your friends. Please leave me some comments below and let me know what other questions you have or what you'd like to see.